Kaitlin.
Hi, Jessica. Good afternoon.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday to everybody out there watching.
Yeah, thanks for joining. This is Making Sense, Move to Amends weekly broadcast, trying to make sense of what happened this week. I'm Jessica Munger. I'm Move to Amends Program Director.
And I'm Kaitlin Sopoci-Belknap, Move to Amends National Director. And we always rotate who covers this from folks on our national team. So Jessica and I got the short straw, long straw, unclear for this week. Feel free to tell us that you're here. Say hey, where you're tuning in from. If you have questions at any point, we'll try to cover them. We don't always get to all of them, but we do see them. And we can also weigh in later. Somebody on the team in comments in chat. Even if you're not listening to this live, you can ask us questions. So this week, I feel like spring is finally here. This is not news, but it's kind of exciting.
Very spring. All of a sudden, it was very overnight here. It's beautiful.
Where's here for you? Maybe people want to know.
Sure. Here's what's called Las Vegas, unceded Mojave land in the desert.
I live in Sacramento, California. So yeah, it's been pretty warm. We didn't really get enough rain this winter though. But as Jessica knows, my heater's been out and it magically just like kind of came back on this week. So now it's like, okay, it can rain again. Before I was feeling like, all right, we need winter to be done because there's no heat here. But now I am unselfishly back to wishing we got a little bit more rain before summer comes because California is going to be hurting in drought conditions again.
Yeah. Again, still, that's a rough one. Well, yeah, things this week were very springy, but the news was less bright. It was kind of a rough week. I feel like there's a lot of stuff that we could talk about, but we're going to try to talk about some of the things that relate to corporate power and give you our take on some of the nonsense. I feel like the theme of this week is like billionaires getting wealthier, workers really trying to rise up, and just a lot of nonsense of the 0.1%.
Yeah. And at the same time, that's like every week, right? I mean, billionaires are making money hand over fist, like unfathomable amounts of money every day, every second, really. And it's wild. And that's what, it's been, especially the last, during the pandemic when their wealth escalated. So we're going to talk about that. Maybe we should just dive right in. I mean, we've been following on the live report and on our social media in general, this Amazon workers push for a union in Bessemer, Alabama. They're going to be voting on whether to join the retail, wholesale, and department union, store union. And they would become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. And then also in part inspired by the folks in Alabama, but also this has been something that's been like bubbling at Amazon for a long time, I think. And now we're seeing it out, those of us who are not in that world every day. So Baltimore, New Orleans, Portland, Denver, and Southern California are also all working on union drives. So all eyes are on what happens in Alabama because that's going to be huge for implications for everyone else.
Huge. Yeah, that's a big deal. And Amazon spends ridiculous amounts of money, obviously trying to, quell any union efforts, of which there have been many, and just the ridiculous amount of money that's being spent. I was reading about the money that Amazon spends often hiring like Koch brothers related people to come in and like implement sort of anti-union stuff at all of the warehouses. Like the amount that they spend on that is absurd. And as we were talking about, billionaires getting richer over the pandemic, there was a report released this week that Jeff Bezos, who saw his personal wealth increase by $65 billion with a B, that means he makes more than $7 million every hour. And meanwhile, Amazon employees are peeing in bottles because they can't afford a bathroom break. So I am very excited about the turnout of this potential union vote. That could mean really big things.
So it's on Monday that workers' ballots will reach the National Labor Relations Board, the regional office in Alabama, and then they'll be counted. And it just takes a majority of ballots for the union. And yeah, as you said, they've been working really hard against this. They've been firing people, for any talk of unionizing. I saw this morning on Twitter, they have this new Twitter account that is out there basically doing like damage control propaganda. They also have some ads, which I haven't personally seen, but I've heard, doing like commercials to try and reframe people's view of them, because at this point, even the public is starting to really question what the hell is wrong with them, that Jeff Bezos is making so much money and it can't be shared with the workers. And meanwhile, they're out there being like, we pay people $15 an hour. They love working for us, blah, blah, blah. So Mark Pocan, a congressman from Wisconsin, tweeted about, in support of the Alabama workers. I don't actually quite remember what his tweet was, but something, criticizing Amazon, and this account like got on there, and he was talking about them peeing in bottles, which Amazon is refuting and saying that's not a thing. So this, probably some like low paid, maybe even not paid intern is like responsible for this Twitter account, responded and was like, you don't actually believe that, do you? Meanwhile, there's pictures that people have. And I also saw, photographs of the kind of rules for drivers, talking about how they need to empty out their vehicles at the end. Otherwise, they will be docked pay, including urine bottles, is like in the sign that somebody took a picture of that's at, Amazon, whatever it is, shipping center.
Wow.
So yeah, they're definitely, so, and then thinking about like the money that they're putting into that advertising and that propaganda PR, instead of just paying their workers better and not having these quotas. It was nuts, just kind of like the tone of this, these instructions to people of like, if you show up late, you will go home without pay, this, that, and the other thing results in dockings. I mean, it was like, not what people would think of as like a happy workplace whatsoever. It's a friggin' sweatshop.
Yeah, absolutely. That is absurd. Just so evil. And Shelley's comment here, Amazon and their CEO have been getting devastating ratios on Twitter. No one is buying their BS. Yeah, that's true. It's like, that's a pretty fun part of this, is that, with the internet, it's easier to sort of be like, well, we have the perspective from your workers also. So no longer do you completely control all the narratives that come out of there, but the money is absurd. And also, I think it's an interesting week to be talking about this major historic union effort, because this week marks the 110th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which is, I think, still to date the deadliest workplace accident in New York City's history, and a very important moment in labor history. So, Amazon, down with Amazon.
So we'll be watching that vote, as will a lot of people, next week, and the implications of it are enormous. And, as Greg points out here, unions would be a lot more effective at organizing workplaces if they spent more funds for organizing and less on campaign funds to Democrats, many of whom are lukewarm for labor organizing. Yep, 100%. And that is one of the challenges that we, have to work with at Move to Amend, because sometimes folks in labor, especially folks higher up in labor, have been concerned about the fact that, Citizens United did technically expand unions' ability to contribute money to elections as well. And so there's this idea that, we need to hold on to that, and maybe Citizens United was good. I think after 10 years, we've seen who's really benefiting from that, and it isn't workers. But, unfortunately, that's part of the whole game when, whether it's, unions or, nonprofits, progressive organizations that set up political action committees, or 501c4s, which can contribute some money to elections. And then, a sense that like, oh, we're in on this too. It's like, you need to pull out, look at the bigger picture. And then, yes, we need to be putting our resources into organizing and educating, not trying to outspend our competition at the ballot box on people who maybe talk a good game when they run for office, and then when they get in there, what do they actually deliver?
Yeah. Or who is giving them money as they're speaking out the other side of their mouth. Like, I don't know, Joe Biden came out with some lackluster statement of support for workers, but like, he was also, I think, Amazon's biggest recipient of funds in the last election. So like, whose team are you on? Like, that's a nice sentiment, but that doesn't mean anything.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, and then we're going to zero in on some local stuff as well. I don't know if folks have been following this. It's kind of been breaking news of the last week in Los Angeles. Echo Park is being swept, this large popular public park in LA, where a lot of people who have to live outside have congregated and have been living, and LAPD has been clashing with protesters. I mean, props to, people in LA who have been showing up in solidarity to support, rather than just letting these sweeps happen, under the radar. So there have been clashes with protesters, and, a lot of violence involved with that. They're making the claim that they're needing to renovate, but it's really, and here in LA, it's similar. It's like you see so many more people living on the streets than even just a year ago. It's so much more visible. And I think that's probably true in every city, maybe even not huge city, like small town. And it's because people can't pay their rent and they're getting forced out. So you have like the already homeless population that we had, which was off the charts. And now it's just exacerbated. And so it's so much more visible. And sorry, go ahead.
In Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true in LA. There's, before the pandemic, 600,000 people in LA spent 90% of their income on rent.
Yeah, I was one of them for a while. That is absolutely true. And yeah, there's so much to say about renting in LA. It's absurd, but like, the housing crisis is just, that's, like you're saying, that's true everywhere. But in LA, it's just, it's thick. It's almost impossible to live in Los Angeles. And, you've got people like this. Well, I won't get into Eric Garcetti right now, but like his replacement on city council, Mitch O'Farrell, which represents the Echo Park neighborhood, is absurd. The violence of these sweeps, the like 400 LAPD officers like swarmed this park on Wednesday in riot gear to kick these people out of their encampments. Like the way that these are being carried out are, violent is the only word for it. You know what I mean? And then they're hiding under, claims that they are putting people in temporary housing. They put up some people in hotels, but like, that is not a solution to the problem. You know what I mean? This is not going away. And the amount of sweeps that happen in this neighborhood is absurd. So it's really coming to a head right now, and a very, I don't know what will happen exactly, but it could be really interesting. The president of the Echo Park Neighborhood Council, and in LA, neighborhood councils have a good amount of power. They're a legitimate part of like the city's infrastructure of government. And the neighborhood council person was arrested, as well as a journalist. And so that's like a big deal that they're arresting journalists who the day before were interviewing these city council people about this. So that's drawn a lot of attention. And then organizers are calling for the resignation of City Councilor O'Farrell and of one of the LAPD chiefs, Michael Moore, who I think they've been calling for his resignation for a long time. So this is like sort of the head of this long struggle against violence against unhoused people in LA, under the guise of making it more, I don't know, palatable for the neighbors there who are the not in my backyard type of people. So yeah, it's a situation.
And when we were talking about, how many people were using 90% of their income on rent, this is pre-pandemic. So it's like, just, if that's your situation, you're just so precarious, and the pandemic just pushed so many people over the edge. And we're just going to see a continuation of that. And so what's happening in LA will probably, we've talked about, every time we go to my partner's mother's house, and that's like the only occasion that we have to like leave our neighborhood, because we can actually go to the grocery store in our neighborhood. So that's like when we get in the car, and just seeing like every week how much more it is. And it's, on one hand, it's like, wow, people are out and, setting up pretty, not temporary like shelters, like all kinds of furniture moved in and stuff like that. And, it's good that people have a place to be. On the other hand, it's just like, when is the other shoe going to drop? How much longer is that going to last before neighbors start to complain and the city sweeps everybody up? And, we have a clash like we've got going on in LA here in Sacramento, or, fill in the blank. And that's why, the issue of housing is such a systemic problem. And, I think we hopefully all know that there's something like 4 houses for every person who is homeless in this country that are empty right now. Like the number of people who have multiple houses that no one is living in is vastly outweighs the number of people who need houses to live in.
Yeah, but that's not the kind of system that we live in, where we can meet people's needs because we can. I guess it doesn't work like that. So yeah. And there's a comment here that, isn't there a moratorium on evictions and rent support? Like, the thing with the moratorium on evictions, and I've seen this a lot here in Las Vegas too, because we just had a situation where our city council bulldozed 600 tiny homes that organizers built in this wash where a lot of people live outside, is that like, there were technically 2 moratoriums. There was a break in between, so a lot of people fell through the cracks there. But then also, technically there's a moratorium on evictions that are related to COVID, but all a landlord has to do is say that it's a noise complaint, and then you can evict someone. So it's not a moratorium on all evictions. It's just COVID, related like money stuff. But there are so many excuses, and that's just what's happening. People are still being evicted left and right just for whatever excuse their landlord wants to make up about it. So it's like, that's the thing about these policies. It's like, I'm sure that it has helped some people, but there's a lot of people slipping through the cracks, and rent support, is very, very hard to go through. And the amount of bureaucracy that's needed and means testing and qualifications needed to receive that kind of support is really inaccessible to a lot of people. So,
Yeah. And, all of this goes back to, we had a crisis in housing before the pandemic. But if we, at least just want to look at that snapshot, it goes back to Congress's inaction and inability to just freeze rent, freeze mortgages, create, the banks that we have bailed out repeatedly as a country is where, any sort of, where there's like cushion to spare. And that's where that should have, the brunt of the pressure should have been put. Instead, it's on people. And then on local government to administer these funds, which, they're already woefully underfunded and giant, and the bureaucracy there is really problematic already. So it's like just throwing it on an already overweighted system that can't handle it. And, it goes back to, if we actually had a system that was rooted in trying to take care of people, this could have been avoided. But that's, as you said, that's not the basis by which decisions are made and weighed in the United States of America. So that's not how we govern.
Absolutely. And there, I think too, it should be said, is a lack of political will on the part of Democrats, especially who have power right now in Congress. Like there are things that could be done in a lot of different ways. And yeah, there are systems in the way of those things being done and lack of political will.
So it's not exactly the best segue, but let's use it so that we can keep on moving so we were talking about Congress, moving to what Congress has been talking about this week, at least in the Senate. So you all probably are on a lot of lists where people are talking about HR1 or the For the People Act, which is also SR1. So this is the first bill that Congress is putting forward besides COVID relief. And, it was written entirely by Democrats. It is a Democratic Party bill. It was passed through the House. It looks like it has a long shot in the Senate, even though Democrats are in charge in the Senate too. But so let's talk about it a little bit, because there's a lot in it. There's a lot of good things that are in it. There's a lot that has been put in it that is a result of the organizing for democracy reform that people have been doing for decades to try and bring this attention. It in part is also attempt to quell the outrage at Citizens United, although it doesn't really systemically address Citizens United, but it is a nod and an acknowledgement that Citizens United, got things even more out of whack in terms of the wealthy dominating the political process. It is also an attempt to some degree to address the voter suppression that goes on in states. However, remember that this isn't lots of times I think we think about bills and it's like, okay, well, there's good things and bad things because you have to do compromises in order to get it passed, blah, blah, blah. Remember that this is a block. This was written by one party. This is sort of their dream agenda. And now it is out there, for potentially getting compromised. And it really doesn't go far enough in the ways that it is helpful. And then there's also some really problematic and kind of scary stuff that's in there. So just want to talk about a little bit of it. First of all, I just want to say, though, that for all of the stuff about Democrats, then we've got Republicans over on the side just manufacturing a ridiculous storyline of what is going on here. So Ted Cruz is sort of the champion of the Republicans these days, right? He's going to be their guy who runs for president. So he takes it upon himself to kind of be the spokesperson. So his line about the For the People Act is that this bill is the single most dangerous bill this committee has ever considered. This bill is designed to corrupt the election process permanently, and it is a brazen and shameless power grab by Democrats that the number one priority is not COVID or getting people back to work or getting kids back in school. It's keeping Democrats in power for 100 years. Okay, first of all, they did address COVID already. Woefully inadequately, in my opinion, but that was the first bill. And then it's just outrageous. I mean, basically what he's talking about there is the efforts to address voter suppression. So what that is an acknowledgement of basically, if we actually give access to everyone to vote and we allow everyone to vote, nobody will fricking vote for us.
Right. That's you couldn't say that more clearly. If we let more people vote, Democrats are going to be in power for 100 years. That's
yeah, exactly.
Loser language right there.
So that deeply problematic, but crazily enough, there's actually a kernel of truth in what Cruz said, although it is not what he's referring to. So there are some provisions in HR1 which heavily will, if passed, help Democrats against independent third parties that are increasingly gaining traction. And in fact, you have an overwhelming majority of Americans saying that they don't have faith in either of the two major parties, that they would support another party rising to power. And you see lots of polls that say that, and there have been some more recent ones that's 60 something, maybe 63%, 65% of Americans think that there should be another party. So in the context of that, it is important that we know that H.R. 1 quintuples the amount of money that independent presidential campaigns would be required to raise in order to qualify for federal matching funds. So right now, you have to raise $5,000 in 20 states, and you can qualify for federal matching funds. The bar will be raised under H.R. 1 to $25,000 per state. So that's 5 times more that independent parties would need in order to get access to matching funds, which is huge in terms of being able to have access.
Huge.
And then in addition to that, the general election campaign block grants that exist that parties can access by winning at least 5% of the vote in the previous election would eliminate that, which has been huge in terms of just even giving independent parties a fair shot at having an opportunity to get involved in the conversation. So it would take away a major point of access. And it would also replace the general election block grants with matching funds through election day, which basically it's like kind of complicated, but each qualified candidate receives a set lump sum of public funding for campaign expenses. And so instead of getting a lump sum, it would be like tiny little parses out. So it's a huge step backwards just in general from public campaign finance reform, which is really what would be needed to systemically address the issue of access. Instead of having our elections financed by private money, they should be funded with public money, the way that we fund public infrastructure. You know, it's roads that everybody uses, while our elections are our democratic infrastructure that should be publicly funded. And so then it's not about how many rich people's asses you can kiss in order to get enough money to run for office, or being a rich person yourself, which is what we see increasingly. You know, it's only a matter of time till Jeff Bezos decides that he wants to run for president, et cetera. So, that is sort of like a bureaucratic setback. And then it also will eliminate the limits on donations and expenditures that candidates can receive and make, which is like the opposite of campaign finance reform and the opposite of addressing Citizens United. And then the last one, which just really freaks me out, it inflates the amount of money that national party committees can give to candidates. So right now, there's a limit on how much the national party can give to any candidate. It's $5,000. And it will increase that amount to $100 million, which means... And so some of these things are sort of like, oh, maybe they kind of like miss something or whatever. But this isn't just eliminating something in order to put something else in. This is a clear effort to tip the scales majorly to the benefit of national political parties. Well, there are 2 of those, the Democrats and the Republicans. So it is, you know, Democrats writing in language that, if passed, would mean that when you've got a candidate running for office, say that it is a independent candidate or a candidate with an alternative political party than the Democratic Party, and they're actually getting traction in a race, or maybe it's even a progressive candidate within the Democratic Party who is getting traction to potentially move towards shifting who dominates the Democratic Party. The national party could step in and dump up to $100 million into that race, obviously skewing it, potentially just, you know, blowing that other candidate out of the water. So I can't imagine any American from any persuasion thinking that this is a good idea, that this is helpful for democracy. But this bill is being touted as if it is the antidote to all of our democratic problems.
Yeah, and they're very proud of it. Like, I will not name names, but, you know, we've been meeting with lots of people about, lots of Democratic Party people about HJR 48. And like, we talked to people who, you know, had a role in getting this out the door. And there's a lot of pride in it. And mostly what I see is people really, really praising it. And I think, you know, like we want hope, right? Like, that feels good to feel like we're moving towards something, but it's very, very dangerous to get caught up in the, you know, if you will, like neoliberal propaganda that these Band-Aid solutions are like fine, when actually they're sometimes more dangerous than what people think they're trying to fix. And that's like really scary. And it's like, I think very telling that this was their first bill out the door, right? Like what happened in the 2020 election when all of those, defund candidates, and people who maybe were running as Democrats but were more independent or had alternative or more progressive platforms, like they crushed it. You know what I mean? And that, I think, really scared the Democratic Party, and that's good. They should be scared. And so here we are. You know what I mean? Let's put a stop to the Cori Bushes of the world. And, I think it's telling that was their priority, actually, like subpar COVID support, and then making sure that progressives don't gain too much power with this movement behind them. That's been swelling for years. So.
And what's really cynical about it is, I mean, there is a huge demand to address campaign finance reform, and there is a huge demand to address the fact that people are denied voting access. I mean, last night, I barely had a chance to really look at this, but in Georgia, there was a state representative who was arrested, a Black woman, dragged out of the signing of this bill that will make voter access harder in Georgia, and address and move us backwards in terms of the ability of mostly African Americans and poor people to be able to vote. And she wanted to be at the signing, which was not, I guess, a public opportunity, but she is a state rep, and she was dragged out by 8 armed cops. And so, it's a very real problem. We have, this idea that everybody can vote in the United States, or that voting is easy, or that this is some kind of functioning democracy. There's a ton of legitimacy to these demands that people are making, which this bill is supposedly going to answer. And some of the things in it are good, but there's a lot in it that when you look deeper, it either doesn't really address the issue, or it doesn't, or these pieces in here, which actually are little, side benefits for the wealthy, and the donors. And so, I don't know who wrote this part, but everyone in the House passed it in the Democratic Party. And they didn't say anything about any of this. No one raised it. No one said, let's get rid of this. They weren't willing to stand up. They're all moving forward as a block, including the ones who claim to not be there for corporations. And the wealthy. And so that is a huge problem, and so typical. So it's important that you let your representative know that you're on to them. And then as this moves through the Senate, there is an effort to try and expose some of this and ideally get it taken out. But unfortunately, where's the political will going to come from when everybody is a Democrat? And potentially knowing that the political party, that last point that I said, it's like that could be their races. Those could be their races that the party will step in and save them from some upstart insurgent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think we should hesitate being like saying that we shouldn't criticize bills that maybe have some good things in them. I think that it's, there's a long history of the Democratic Party passing things that people don't understand the depth of. And I think that it's fair that we have some nuance as we're looking at what's coming towards us, because, we work a lot on these issues. We understand how important it is to not compromise when you sit down at the table, right? Like you don't start compromising. And so it's kind of confusing to me why so many rank and file Democrats don't want to see this with any sort of nuance, because they could actually make it better, maybe, if they were willing to ever question anything that the Democratic Party leadership was telling them, and actually read the text and understand what that's going to do. So I encourage us to maybe give it some nuance and not just say it's good enough, because the way we get here to our leadership giving us like absolute crumbs as we're all trying to survive is by saying thank you when they hand you a crumb and not demanding better. So sorry, I know that's not really like the American way to be, but like that's not good enough.
Well, and it's like when we're already pushed all the way to the edge of the cliff, and then we're told, okay, well, we're going to take one step forward, but 2 steps back. And it's like, okay, well, we're still going to fall off the edge of the cliff.
Yes, we are. We are falling off the cliff. So I guess you can say thank you as you fall down, but like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. And that's really not the role that Move to Amend has committed to and promised to take. Also, you know, because it is such an effective soundbite, there is lots of talk of how the For the People Act is going to address Citizens United. I've seen some of the groups that used to talk about that in a way that was like staking out so much territory beyond what was real, have now dialed it back a little bit, and they're talking about it in a more modest way. But the reality is that it doesn't address Citizens United at all, because Citizens United can actually only be addressed through an amendment to the Constitution, because legislation is going to go up against this idea that corporations have constitutional rights and that money is speech. And so any legislation that limits money in politics, when you measure it up against that litmus test of, well, does spending money in elections, isn't that a free speech right that everybody and any entity has full access to do? And the answer is, under current Supreme Court interpretation, and the current Supreme Court that isn't even the one as bad, or that is worse than the one that passed Citizens United, we know where they would land. So an amendment is necessary. You can't do an amendment with a bill that just requires a simple majority to get passed. And so there's no amendment that is, on the table for passage anytime soon. Yet, we think that it's really important to explain all that to people and not just try to gloss over it and say, it's okay, you don't need to understand that. We're just going to try and make this sound like it's going to do more than it is, because we don't want you to know how far screwed we are. That's also not something that, we're willing to do as Move to Amend. But the other piece of it is the amendment that is being pushed or put up there as like, well, this is the sort of step 2 to this bill that will help enforce all of it. HJR 1 and the Democracy for All Amendment, which matches in the name, just says that Congress may regulate campaign spending. Yeah, well, maybe, but
probably not.
Why would they? Why would they? When we just talked about, who finances them and puts them in office and how the whole paradigm works there. Why would they choose?
If you will, please be better. The states are allowed to be better. Like, what? It's so absurd. It's so absurd. And trusting the legislative package means that you're trusting the Supreme Court to uphold what's right in that situation. Because like you're saying, anything that's legislative there is going to go up against the Supreme Court because of corporate constitutional rights. And so if you're relying on legislation to solve this problem, it makes zero sense why you would trust the Supreme Court that created corporate constitutional rights to then not. I really don't understand.
Right. And so part of what we're just saying is like, at a minimum, just tell people the truth. Just tell people the truth. We need this legislation, and it's not enough, because this is the reality. We have given the judiciary way too much power. They have used it against us. And now we can't even trust that our Constitution will protect us when corporations are on the other side, that the Constitution is really more likely to be used in their favor than ours. Absolutely. I just want to see people in Congress willing to actually admit that that's our reality, and then that they're going to do something about it, and they're going to fight to do something about it. But even just admitting that that's what the problem is would be a start. And, I see some of the comments here saying like, well, this is all we can get, et cetera. But, it's like that just keeps us on this wheel of like, well, this is the best we can do. and on to the next thing.
Yep.
And if we never address these problems systemically, if we never talk about them even systemically, well, then we kind of get what we deserve. And that's the whole point of our organization, is that we are, we're not a DC-based group. We're not a group that is here to kind of help prop all of that up. We're here to like call that out, name it for what it is, and to fight for something more real, more systemic, and more. Am I still even here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened, but I lost my tab and I was like, did I end up on all of this? That wasn't a very good crescendo, but.
No, but that's exactly right. And I really, really want to challenge people to think beyond like, this is the best we can get. Like, that is not how progress happens, right? That's how progress gets held back. And like, we know, because we study the history of social movements, that attitude is how you don't get the Equal Rights Amendment. That's the attitude where you don't actually get the vote for all people. That attitude is counter-revolutionary. And I'll just say it, like, if we're going to actually fix these problems and you actually want that, then you have to be able to challenge Democratic Party leadership on their bullshit and be able to see the nuance in that sometimes things are a little bit good and a little bit really bad. So like, I think we're grown up enough to be able to see both of those things at the same time. I hope we are, because we are not going to get anywhere with just saying this is the best we can get.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's, well, and on the last piece of Congress, and we're coming up on the hour, so if there's anybody who has any questions, ask them now so that we can get to them. But we are still working to get the We the People Amendment introduced in this Congress. It will be, this will be the 5th Congress that the We the People Amendment has been introduced in. We're just waiting to get to 48. Because we've had that same number for the last 6 years and we want to keep it. It helps with our organizing efforts if we don't have to change it every time. So 48 will come sometime later. Right now they're on 33. So this is, I'm talking about, House Joint Resolution numbers, which is what an amendment has to be. So they're up to 33 other amendment proposals. And when they get to 48, ours will be introduced. And what we're doing in the meantime is working to secure co-sponsors. We ended last year with 75. We want to start this year with 100 or as close to that as we can, because 100 is our goal for this year. And we're trying to get it right out of the gate or as close to that as we can. So we've got folks having meetings with Congress members and their staff over the last couple months. And that's what we're going to continue on and focusing on into April. We're at, I think, 43 committed. So a little bit less, more than halfway to go. It doesn't help us that it hasn't been introduced yet. We really thought it was going to be introduced by now. It's never gone this far into the year before we've gotten there. The first time we got 48, it was in January, and the next time was in February. So we're just kind of biding our time and trying to do as much education and pressuring. The reason why it doesn't help us that it hasn't been introduced yet is it makes it easy for offices to tell us that they'll get to it. So that's why your pressure is really important. We do have a legislative briefing, basically, presentation that we're doing for congressional staff next Tuesday online, and you can help us get people there by calling your representative's office. They've already all been invited, so telling them to attend the We the People Amendment briefing. We'll be sending a blast out that on Sunday, so if you're not on our email list, you should go to movetoamend.org/motion, sign the petition, and that will plug you into our communications and then also, our work if you want to stay connected going forward and find out how you can help this campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will encourage you to consider, let me back up. In case you're new here, the amendment that we're talking about, HJR 48, the We the People Amendment, says corporations and other artificial entities should not have constitutional rights and that money is not free speech. So this is the only systemic solution that actually addresses this whole entire realm of corporate power and money and politics and all of these things that, we've been talking about with attempts. We are the only organization that's pushing for an amendment that covers both of these things. We are not a DC-based organization that has, a several $1 million budget and 500 staff. There are like 8 of us, doing this work on grassroots donations. We obviously don't get funding from big corporations or from political parties or big family foundations. So we really have been doing this work on a very grassroots level for over a decade on people giving each month what they can. So I just want to encourage you, like, if this is the way that you can plug into the movement is by giving financially, it's a very good investment. And if you're looking for an organization that spends its money wisely and with impact, I invite you to be a part of it that way. And you can do that at movetoamend.org/donate.
And again, if you want to, we're assuming if you're on our social media channels, you're probably connected, but there are a lot of people who follow us, especially on Facebook and Twitter, who maybe have not signed the petition. So going to movetoamend.org/motion is the way to kind of get in initially. You can also text amend, AMEND, to 707-654-4019. I don't know if we've got that as something that could be put up on the screen. I said it kind of fast, but the easier way, if you're in front of your computer, might be to just go to movetoamend.org/motion. And like I said, that's where you can get news about action alerts. Thanks, Alfonso, for putting that up. You can get news about action alerts, events coming up, ways to plug in your area. Move to Amend is, when we keep saying we're not a DC-based group, we are a grassroots-based group, meaning that we have chapters all over the country, and there are people organizing, either in your community or near you, to support Move to Amend, to support the We the People amendment in your state. And plugging in with them is the best way to help move this movement forward. And like I said earlier, what we're doing right now is having a lot of meetings with congressional staff and some representatives to educate them about this issue. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we talked about earlier. So, we went off on Democrats in the House, but, a lot of people do not read every bill. They're sort of like, oh, that's so-and-so's domain. And they don't necessarily know or understand all of this. And so that's a lot of the work that we have to do is educate our representatives and the staff who work for them, who are really the ones who actually decide, other than these very, very national news stories where, yes, the reps will decide what their position is. But on a lot of the policy stuff, they leave it to their staff to decide. So that's why it's so important that we educate these people to understand corporate constitutional rights, to understand that the problem didn't begin with Citizens United, that actually the problem began over 100 years ago with this idea that corporations should have rights in the Constitution, and what that means for, our so-called democracy. And so that's a lot of the work that we do. So donating to support us supports us to do that. And then also plugging in as a volunteer and helping us help you to educate your representative, and, or if they're uneducatable, to, expose that reality, and then help look for candidates who are running against them to make this into an election issue when they're trying to get reelected, so that voters can know and understand where their representative really stands. So plug in with it. We had thought that, the amendment would have been introduced by now, and that we would be, ready to start moving on to other focuses as we close out March, but we still have a way to go. So we're going to double down and spend April. Hopefully by the end of next month, the amendment will be introduced. And then we can kind of take stock and go from there on what happens next. And there will be some exciting stuff that goes beyond the amendment, looking at, the Constitution more fundamentally, and some of the other ways that it needs to be reworked and or rewritten so that democracy can actually flourish instead of always being thwarted.
Yeah. Well, that was good. Good line. I like that. And I just want to encourage too, as with all the stuff we were talking about today, to feel like empowered to get in touch with the people who are supposed to be representing you on every level and tell them what you want. You don't actually have to kiss their butts all the time, especially, when you're feeling like the people in power have the power to be representing you and they're not. Like, let's just stretch ourselves to believe that we deserve more than crumbs here, and that we actually can realize like a radically better situation, but we have to demand it. So let's do that.
I think the way that I tried, I was just doing a radio interview earlier this morning, and we were talking about some of this stuff. And it's like the problem in this country at the most fundamental level is that we don't have power. We, the people, do not have power over the institutions that dominate our lives, whether that is, at work, that is our government, that is, down to the local level, that is, how we get our basic needs met. We don't really have influence over those things. And so to me, that's like what the fundamental problem is. And so when we're thinking about how we act and what we do, we always have to take it back to that. We have to think about what actions allow us to exercise, but at the same time, I guess I should also say, that we have the potential for that power. We don't live in a dictatorship, right? We don't, there are a lot of ways that we have, a police state, and so no question. And it's not like there are not repercussions to happen if you actually act with power, especially in an organized way over time. But that's what we're fighting. So that's what we have to go back to. That's what we have to try and figure out how to address. So to me, the questions are always, is that the most powerful action we could take? Are we really internalizing what the power that we should have and acting as if we do, because that's part of what will make that true. And so, I think you're saying this too, of like, if we're just accepting crumbs, that's not powerful. That's not powerful. That's not good enough. And that's never going to get us where we need to go. So yeah, if they pass crumbs, let's take any of the crumbs that we can use for nourishment. And, if more people get ability to vote as a result of, this bill passing, then that will be good. And we should leverage that for sure. But should we go around talking about it as if it's some sort of solution, which is what the dominant story about this bill is, and which is what the Democratic Party leadership in Congress would like us to believe? How does it help us to continue to perpetuate that story about it?
Yeah. It's a lack of self-respect and a long and deep forgetting of our power. I think that's absolutely right. So let's not do that. That's not working.
Let's knock that off. Step one, right? I mean, it's not like there's an easy set of steps after that, but it's like, first step is pick yourself up off the ground before you can walk.
Yeah.
That's simple.
Oh, and Alfonso just shared, we've got a survey. And so if you will take our survey, that helps us a lot just to kind of gauge where folks are at with things. And it would go a long way, and you might win a t-shirt, and who doesn't like a free t-shirt? So take a minute to take that survey. And thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, and thanks to the hundreds of folks who have already responded. We appreciate you, and that's why we're doing the giveaway. But most important is us having a sense of, where our supporters are at, what you want to see happen, and those kinds of things. So thank you for filling that in. I think that there's, I guess the one other thing we want to mention is that the live report is next week. So I always do a kind of recap of the month, from Move to Amend's perspective and corporate rule news, and then also what's going on with Move to Amend. So join me next Wednesday. It's on the last Wednesday of the month. So that's next Wednesday, and that'll be at 5. And you can tune in via whatever channel you're tuning in now, at 5:00 Pacific on Wednesday. Is there anything else we were supposed to cover that we missed?
Well,
I don't remember who's on next week. It's Keon and
I'm not sure.
Oh shoot! Sorry guys, we don't remember.
Some very entertaining and knowledgeable hosts will be here next week.
There will be some fabulous people from Move to Amend who will be here next Friday, and you don't really need to know who they are because they're me smart no matter who it is. Greg and Keon. See? Yep. What I said is 100% true. All right. Well, I think we're close to putting a fork in us.
Yeah, and I before we end, I just want to give a huge thanks to Alfonso, who is making all of this happen and produces Making Sense. So thank you so much for all of that work. And yeah, thanks, Kaitlin.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. Thanks for tuning in with us, everyone. It was great to have you here. Like I said earlier, if you've got questions and you want to ask them, you still can in the comments. You can always interface with us on social media. And even if you're listening to the recording, we'll do our best to circle back and get your question answered. But also you can contact us at movetoamend.org anytime, every time. All right, everybody, have a good week. And have a good weekend and rest your week next week and stay safe.
See ya.